Welcome to the Stygian Stilettos Gamer channel. This is StygianSis. Please like, share, and subscribe, and find me at twitter.com/StygianSis. Hey, Final Fantasy fam. So, I put part 4 just for continuity and not to confuse everyone, but there is actually no part 4. In the original, there is no, biker scene with Roche. I believe that's how you say his name. He's a completely new character. There is no going to Jesse's house, before the second mission and all of that. So, I thought I'd take a little time just to get my first thoughts on it. If you don't know, I haven't actually beaten the full game basically since it came out. I played it in, I believe, 1999 because Final Fantasy 9 was out, but Final Fantasy 10 was not. So that'd be 2000, I think. And 2000. And that was the only time I've actually played it all the way through from my recollection. I've played it several times, but that's the only time I actually technically beat it. So, I had forgotten a ton of details, but, playing it is just kind of like, it's real nostalgic. And, as things are happening, it's like I played it just a little while ago rather than 20 years ago now in my mind. But some major differences I see is way less details in this first part, and it actually makes me glad that they've decided to go the route that they went. You really, and I mean, to some degree it was just technological advances, that just weren't there 20 years ago, when you add in the voice acting. And it really does matter because you have 5 senses, and part of the problem, I think, and maybe what adds to a lot of the confusion about Cloud's character in general is, it matters, like the inflection in your voice when you're speaking and things like that. Being able to actually read someone's body language. These just things that when they're a bunch of little goofy ass looking polygons that you can't pick up on, and then they have no voice. If you they're just things that the writers and everything, they can only do so much at the time. So it's nice to be able to actually flesh out these characters. They've taken that whole dating minigame thing. That's what I consider. It's just like this, and that's where a lot of this, confusion about if it's a Cloudy or Clarith game. If you take out the dating simulation thing, which choose your own path was really popular at one point, and having multiple, adding some sort of teen drama into stuff. It was really unneeded in this game because the game it already has an amazing plot. It did not need this nonsense minigame but it's not even meant to be taken seriously because you can end up on a date with Barrett too. I mean, that ought to give people a clue right there. That it is not, the interactions aren't even necessarily canon. They're not really canon because which are the correct, I mean, the only ones that you can really say are correct are the ones involving Tifa because he ends up with her. So it's funny when Cloud has options like, Tifa asks how do you sleep, and next to you, or did you sleep next to you, who wouldn't? I mean, it's funny, but it's just not meant to be taken that seriously. People are blowing it way out of proportion. I guess for their own purposes, and that's fine. Do what you do, but whatever. Anyway, I digress. Not gonna get started on that. But it's it's nice to have a lot more fleshed out details. And it makes the larger events larger. So, when you have that preface of, him having a memory of he and Tifa in the first chapter in Remake, and you see his inability to really kind of convey his feelings for Tifa, and then you see Aerith tell him the things about the flower, what the flower actually means, and then he hands it off to Tifa, and there's no optional thing, as I was mentioning with the dating thing. That has a lot more meaning. When he falls from the church in when he falls from Reactor 5 in chapter 7, everything, you know, these Tifa and he have spent the whole day together. You can see a rapport growing between he and Barrett. He's sort of started to bond with the other Avalanche members. There's a lot of story happening in those first 6 chapters. So by the time he falls from that church and you see Tifa's anguish and stuff, it just seems to mean a little more than, you know, just some dude who popped up 3 hours ago and now he's falling from a church. And yeah, I think it's more impactful. And then especially like with the Sector 7 collapse, the plate falling. In the original, you don't really, you know, there's not a ton of interaction between you and the other Avalanche members. So when they die, it's just like, okay. I mean, sucks, but it's not. But when you get through spending all that time with them, you spend, let's see, 3 chapters with them, and 3 chapters with them, and then, you know, Jesse gets hurt, and you know, in chapter 12, you watch them like either die or almost die. You know what I mean? When the plate falls, you're thinking about that too. It just hits more. So I really think it was the best route. And let me tell you something. I was one of their biggest detractors. I thought it was just a money-making scheme, which maybe it still is, but I tell you what, it was a hell of a money-making scheme, because when I had no faith in that game, and I am absolutely obsessed with Final Fantasy, okay? But when I played that game, I mean, I ate every word I ever said about it. It was truly, I have not played a remake that well since God of War, which I know wasn't technically a remake, it's a continuation, but God of War was, I mean, you have to reinvent everything. You reinvented everything, you know, but they managed to keep Kratos, even though everything else was so different. So, but yeah, so I immediately think of God of War when I think of the how well they remade Final Fantasy VII so far. So looking forward to it. Now man, it's just going to be interesting. I'm only playing through, you know, what would have been what is chapter 18 in Remake. Yeah, mainly just the fleshing out the details. There are some differences in Cloud's personality. A little bit. He is a bit more upbeat and nonchalant. But again, that could just be, again, without having the inflection and stuff in the voice to go off of. It's really hard to, in any facial expressions, anybody, you know, it's very hard to say that he's totally different. And if you take out the little dating simulation nonsense, yeah, I'd say it's relatively consistent, his character. The biggest difference being that instead of remembering the promise on his own in Remake, in the original, Tifa has to remind him, and he's still a little hesitant to stay and help her, which doesn't even necessarily make sense either, you know, in OG. So I'm definitely glad that they went a little bit different with that, because what's the hesitance? You've already blown up one reactor. I mean, you're already on the terrorist watch list. What's the harm in another? So, yeah, I definitely am enjoying playing OG. It's fun. And it's, like I said, very nostalgic. And it does have a great plot, a great storyline. But I am more than ecstatic that we are finally getting a properly done remake on this one. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Next portion will be chapter 5, the equivalent of chapter 5 for Final Fantasy VII Original. I'll see you later. This is Stygian Stilettos Gamer, and I am # out of here, honey.